Have you ever lain awake at night, your mind racing with a problem that seems impossible to solve? Perhaps your bank account's empty, or that relationship is crumbling, and your brain won't stop trying to fix what feels unfixable. I remember staring at my ceiling at 3 a.m., tears streaming silently, wondering if morning would ever come. Then I discovered what God does while we sleep. When your eyes finally close in surrender, that's precisely when He begins His most powerful work. This isn't just wishful thinking, it's the hidden promise that carried countless people through their darkest hours. Stay with me, because I'm about to show you exactly what happens in the spiritual realm when you finally let go. Have you ever watched someone try to sleep while clutching their phone, laptop, and a stack of bills? They toss and turn, eyes wide open at 3 a.m., as if the universe depends on them staying awake to solve every problem before sunrise. That's most of us, lying there in the dark, our minds racing through worst-case scenarios, calculating solutions, and carrying burdens that were never ours to bear. Here's what we forget. God doesn't need you to pull all-nighters. He's not up in heaven thinking, I hope they figure this out because I'm fresh out of ideas. Yet something in us believes that if we don't solve it, it won't get solved. As if the creator of galaxies is waiting on our spreadsheets and action plans. Let me tell you something that might sound harsh, but will actually set you free. Your constant worry is actually a form of arrogance. It's like telling God, thanks for hanging the stars and keeping the planets in orbit, but I'll handle my rent payment myself. This misplaced responsibility crushes you emotionally as you struggle under weights never meant for human shoulders. Every sleepless night is you saying, I don't trust you with this, God. We're absolutely terrible at being God, yet we insist on trying. Your exhausted mind spinning at 3 a.m. isn't paying a single bill, healing a single relationship, or solving a single problem. It's just stealing your peace, your rest, and tomorrow's strength. This human limitation stands in stark contrast to what happens when you finally surrender your problems before sleep. You activate God's work. It's like signing transfer papers that move your burden from your limited capacity to God's unlimited divine resources. Your surrender isn't God's cue to start caring. He already cares deeply. It's His cue that you're finally ready to let Him work without interference. Think about Joseph in Scripture. The answers came when he stopped striving and surrendered to sleep, even in a prison cell. God spoke clearly when Joseph's mind was finally quiet enough to listen. The mechanics of surrender aren't about giving up, they're about giving over. Giving up is raising the white flag in defeat. Giving over is recognizing who actually has authority over your situation. I remember Sarah, who had been facing financial ruin for months. Her breakthrough came when she decided to close her laptop and say, God, I'm giving this to you. Within days, she received an unexpected refund, a job offer, and debt restructuring. The solutions came when I finally stopped trying to be my own God. The solutions that suddenly appeared in Sarah's life weren't random coincidences. They were evidence of God's invisible hand that had been working all along. While she slept, divine machinery was turning, assembling pieces of her breakthrough that she couldn't possibly see. This is happening in your life right now too. Beyond the veil of what your physical eyes can perceive, God is actively orchestrating circumstances, positioning people, and aligning opportunities specifically tailored for your situation. We live in a world obsessed with visible proof. The gravity holding you in your seat right now, you feel its effects but have never seen it. The wind that rustles through your hair can topple entire buildings, yet remains completely invisible. The love that transformed your relationships cannot be captured in any photograph. These powerful forces in your daily life demonstrate a profound truth. The most significant influences often operate beyond our physical sight. This reveals exactly how God works in your circumstances. While you focus on visible problems, He operates in the invisible realm, arranging solutions you haven't discovered yet. Joseph's story illustrates this perfectly. Sold into slavery by his brothers, a visible disaster. Yet behind this apparent tragedy, God was positioning him to become a leader who would save countless lives during a famine. Similarly, Esther's elevation from ordinary girl to Queen of Persia wasn't mere coincidence, but divine positioning that saved her entire people from destruction. Both stories reveal God's consistent pattern of working beyond our line of sight. God sees your entire story simultaneously, your past, present, and future laid before Him like a completed tapestry. What feels like unbearable delay is perfect timing in His view. For 40 years, Moses tended sheep in Midian after fleeing Egypt. Every day probably felt like confirmation that he had ruined his destiny. Those decades weren't punishment, but preparation for the exact leadership skills needed to guide a nation. Right now, God is connecting you with specific people destined for your breakthrough. Your next opportunity might involve someone living across the country, completely unaware they'll soon cross paths with you. This divine network assembles while you sleep. Romans 8:28 reminds us that, in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him. This isn't passive hope, it's active divine intervention happening beyond your sight. Your current standstill isn't evidence of God's absence, but proof of His behind-the-scenes work, preparing something greater than a quick fix. What looks like punishment to you resembles preparation to God. Those unexplainable struggles crushing down on your shoulders today aren't random cruelties. They're calculated training exercises designed specifically for your future calling. There's a purpose in your pain that transcends what your limited perspective can comprehend right now. When hardship strikes, our first response is almost always, "Why me?" We interpret suffering as evidence that God has either abandoned us or is punishing us for some past mistake. This interpretation feels natural because pain, by its very nature, feels like a penalty. But what if that exact circumstance causing you sleepless nights is actually the clearest sign that God is preparing you for something extraordinary? The resistance you feel today builds spiritual muscle for tomorrow's calling. In the weight room, pressure and strain aren't punishments. They're prerequisites for growth. God operates similarly in our spiritual development, allowing resistance to strengthen you for greater purpose. Consider Joseph's story more deeply. Before interpreting dreams in Pharaoh's palace, he endured a brutal journey. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and forgotten in prison, each painful chapter seemed like punishment. Yet every injustice positioned him perfectly. Prison taught him to interpret dreams. Slavery taught him Egyptian customs and language. Betrayal taught him forgiveness. When famine struck and his opportunity for leadership arrived, those punishment years had equipped him with every skill needed to save nations. The prison wasn't a punishment. It was preparation for a palace assignment he couldn't have imagined during his darkest days. Ask yourself, what if your current struggle is developing the exact quality you'll need for your future breakthrough? What specific strength might God be building within you right now? The refiner's fire provides another powerful truth. Gold becomes pure only through intense heat that burns away impurities. The refiner doesn't place gold in fire to destroy it, but to transform it into something more valuable. Comfort might feel better, but it never produces character. The fire you're feeling today is purifying you for a purpose that requires your absolute best. This is the breakthrough realization. Your current struggles indicate preparation for something greater. They're building capacity for your calling. Every major biblical figure faced their greatest test, right before their greatest assignment. This is the trust transaction at work. God asks for your trust now, so He can reveal your purpose later. Your current pain is directly connected to your future power. He's not withholding blessing. He's developing your ability to steward it when it arrives. The stewarding of blessing requires not just character, but timing. We demand instant answers, while God coordinates 1,000 moving pieces we can't even see. The question that changes everything: what if that breakthrough you've been desperately waiting for arrived today, but you weren't ready for it yet? Nothing tests your faith like divine silence. You've prayed until your knees ached. You've believed until your faith felt stretched thin as paper. Heaven seems silent and doubt creeps in. Does God even hear me? Does He care about what I'm going through? God's delays serve as protection, not punishment. Abraham waited 25 years between God's promise and Isaac's birth. 25 years of questioning, doubting, and wondering if he'd misheard God. He was 75 when God promised him a son, but 100 when Isaac was born. This waiting period transformed Abraham, preparing him to become the father of nations. God sees your complete life picture, past, present, and future simultaneously. When you pray for a solution, you operate with severely limited information. You see the immediate problem. God sees how each potential solution ripples through decades of your future. He solves today's crisis while positioning you for the next 50 years. The Israelites wandered 40 years before reaching the Promised Land. Those decades weren't pointless suffering. They were necessary preparation. God developed in them the spiritual and physical resilience needed for challenges awaiting them in Canaan. During her early ministry development, Joyce Meyer experienced financial hardship that shaped her faith. We were short $40 each month of what we needed just to pay our monthly bills, she recalls. This painful waiting period taught her something vital. God doesn't expect us to have everything figured out. We can trust that He knows and will take care of everything. God isn't just preparing your circumstances for the solution, He's preparing you. Some blessings require spiritual maturity to steward properly. Some answers would destroy you if they arrived before you were ready to handle them. Would you hand a teenager keys to a Ferrari on their 16th birthday? That's irresponsibility, not love. Similarly, God withholds certain blessings until you're ready to steward them without being destroyed by them. The testimony of countless believers confirms this pattern. What looked like God's no protected them from disaster. The relationship that didn't work out, the job they didn't get. Years later, they discovered those unanswered prayers were God's mercy in disguise. As Maya wisely notes, when we trust God, we have to get comfortable with not knowing everything, not knowing how God is going to accomplish what needs to be done, and not knowing when He will do it. Living with unanswered questions stretches our faith in uncomfortable but necessary ways. Living with unanswered questions stretches our faith. But what if the problem isn't God's response time, but our release technique? Let me tell you something. That tension in your shoulders, those racing thoughts at 3 a.m., the chronic fatigue you've been battling, these are physical evidence that you haven't truly surrendered control. Your body keeps the score of every worry you claim to have given to God, but secretly took back. Most of us have mastered the language of surrender without actually practicing it. We say, "I trust God" with our lips, while our white-knuckled grip on our problems tells a completely different story. The disconnect between what we claim to believe and how we physically respond creates a spiritual short circuit that blocks the very peace God promises. What you need is a practical protocol for physically transferring your burdens. Your body holds spiritual tension in physical ways, like that knot in your stomach when you think about financial pressure, or that shallow breathing when considering relationship problems. These physical responses are opportunities for surrender practice. Here's your surrender protocol. 1. Identify where you feel the stress. Place your hand there, take a deep breath, and visualize releasing that specific burden upward as you exhale. 2. Declare your surrender out loud. God, I transfer ownership of this situation to you. I acknowledge I cannot control the outcome. 3. Create a God box. Write each worry on separate papers and physically place them in the box as a tangible act of release. 4. Transform your bedroom into a surrender sanctuary with pre-sleep rituals that signal to your mind you're transferring the night watch to God. Practice morning reinforcement. Before checking your phone, pause to acknowledge, God, I reaffirm my trust in your handling of what I gave you yesterday. I've witnessed how these practices transformed anxiety for many people. One woman who had been planning for worst-case scenarios for years finally slept through the night after physically placing each fear in her God box every evening. This wasn't magical thinking. It created a physical action that helped her mind accept the reality of spiritual surrender. Throughout your day, use Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God, as a moment-by-moment reconnection point. When anxiety rises, pause for just 10 seconds and repeat this verse, reminding yourself who's really in control. Joyce Meyer emphasizes that true trust in God leads to a special kind of rest that can be experienced even in difficult circumstances. This rest comes not from changed conditions, but from fully leaning on God, rather than wrestling with outcomes you can't control. Let me tell you something. God doesn't need your help. He needs your trust. The profound wisdom of Corrie ten Boom echoes across time from the darkness of a Nazi concentration camp. Worry does not empty tomorrow of its sorrow. It empties today of its strength. She understood something most of us still struggle to grasp, that our anxiety doesn't solve tomorrow's problems. It only steals today's peace. When you release your grip on worry and embrace trust, your body responds with improved immune function and better mental health. Your timeline hasn't frustrated him. Your problems haven't confused him. And here's the beautiful reality. The God who orchestrates the universe is taking the night shift for you. Tonight, surrender your worries and watch what happens when you finally let him work.